the summer of 1995, my neighbor walked into my backyard with two county deputies and told them I have ruined his pool, which was a strange thing to hear, considering that pool sat behind my house, on my land, paid for with my overtime checks, clean with my busted knees on that concrete deck, and enjoyed by my family for more than a decade before Vernon Pike ever backed his moving truck into the driveway next door. I remember standing there in my kitchen, one hand still on a coffee mug, looking past those deputies at the empty blue hole in my backyard and thinking, well, Earl, this is either the dumbest thing that ever happened on Maple Bend Road, or it is about to become the most useful folder of receipts you ever kept in your life. My name is Earl Whitaker. I was 52 years old then. I ran a small auto parts store outside Bowling Green, Kentucky, and I was not what anybody would call a dramatic man. I liked black coffee, clean invoices, Saturday baseball on the radio, and people who understood that a fence was not a suggestion. But Vernon Pike had a different philosophy about fences, property lines, neighborly kindness, and apparently reality itself. Botte. Vernon moved into the brick ranch house on my west side in October of 1994. Him and his wife Marlene, both in their late 40s, both polished in that church bulletin sort of way, always waving from the driveway, always saying the neighborhood had so much potential, which is a phrase people use when they mean everybody else ought to change first. I did not dislike him at the beginning. Not really. He was loud, sure, and he had one of those laughs that made dogs stop barking just to listen, but he seemed harmless enough. A salesman for a farm equipment outfit. A man who wore short-sleeve dress shirts tucked too tightly into pleated pants and carried himself like he was always 2 minutes away from giving a speech at the Rotary Club. My pool had been there since 1983, back when my wife Linda was still alive and our boys were young enough to cannonball without needing aspirin afterward. 20 by 40, concrete white coping, a little diving board at the deep end, nothing fancy by movie star standards. But to us it had been a miracle, a patch of cool water in a hot Kentucky backyard, paid for with 12 years of sensible decisions and one foolishly happy summer where Linda said, "Earl, life is short. Let us have one beautiful thing before we get old." After she passed in 1991, that pool became a strange kind of company. Not a sad thing exactly, more like a room of the house that happened to be outside. I skimmed leaves from it, checked chlorine, sat beside it in the evenings with the radio low, and sometimes I could still hear the boys laughing like they were 10 and 12 again, instead of grown men with mortgages and babies of their own. So when Vernon came over in May of 1995 and asked whether his grandkids could swim sometime, I did not see trouble coming. I saw a grandfather trying to make a memory, and Lord help me, I had a soft spot for that. He stood at my back gate with his sunglasses pushed up on his head and said, "Earl, I hate to impose, but those little ones saw your pool from the upstairs window, and now they think you are Walt Disney." I told him maybe once in a while, if I was home, if he was watching them. And if they understood my rules, no running, no roughhousing, no glass, no going near the pump shed, no using the diving board unless I said so. Vernon clapped me on the shoulder like we had just signed a treaty between nations and said, "You are a prince, Earl, an absolute prince." And that was the first warning sign. Because in my experience, when a grown man calls you a prince for letting him do one small thing, he is already imagining the next 10 things. The first swim was fine. 2 grandkids, a towel apiece, Vernon sitting in a lawn chair telling old sale stories, Marlene bringing lemonade in plastic cups, everybody pleasant, everybody grateful, and I remember thinking Linda would have liked the sound of children laughing back there again. Then once in a while became every Saturday, and every Saturday became Saturday and Sunday, and by late June, Vernon had started showing up on weekday evenings saying things like, "Hope you do not mind, Earl. They have been melting in that heat," as if the weather had appointed me county lifeguard. The grandkids were not bad kids. I want that clear. They were children, and children will take every inch adults hand them. But Vernon was not a child, and he understood exactly what he was doing. He would arrive with towels already over his arm, cooler packed, Marlene behind him with a paperback, and he would speak in that cheerful public voice of his, the one that made refusal feel like you were kicking a puppy in front of witnesses. By July, it was not just his grandkids, it was his brother-in-law, a niece from Paducah, a couple from church, then some visiting cousins who called me Mr. Poolman because Vernon apparently thought that was funny. I started feeling like a stranger at my own fence, the kind of fool who had given away his porch, one handshake at a time. One evening, I came home from the store after a long day dealing with alternators and angry men who thought every part should cost what it cost in 1974. And there were 6 people in my pool. 6. None of them related to me. 2 of them holding cans of cola over the water. Vernon leaning back in my old aluminum chair like a resort manager. I stepped onto the patio and said, "Vernon, we need to talk." He gave me that big grin and said, "Sure thing, Earl. Just let the kids finish this game." I said, "No, now." That smile stayed on his face, but it froze around the edges, and that was when I first saw the man behind the neighbor act. I told him this had gone too far, that I had agreed to occasional swimming with supervision, not open access, not guests, not a community program. Vernon laughed like I was being dramatic and said, "Come on now, Earl, do not get tight on me, it is just water." I said, "It is my water, in my pool, behind my house." He looked at me then, not angry yet, just disappointed in a way that felt rehearsed, and said, "I thought folks around here took care of each other." That line stuck in me, because it was clever. It made ownership sound selfish and boundaries sound unchristian, and I knew right then that Vernon was not confused. He was negotiating with shame. I ended the arrangement that evening, polite but clear, and no more pool use unless I personally invited him, and I did not plan to. For about 2 weeks, peace returned, and I remember enjoying one quiet Saturday so much I fell asleep in the shade with the Reds game murmuring beside me, and when I woke up, I thought the whole thing had blown over. It had not. In early August, I noticed the gate latch was loose. Not weather loose, not old hardware loose, but the kind of loose that comes from somebody working at it with impatience and a screwdriver. I tightened it, added a padlock, and told myself not to jump to conclusions because I was raised in a house where accusing a man without proof was nearly as bad as stealing from him. 3 days later, I came home and found wet footprints on the concrete, a purple hair ribbon near the steps, and my skimmer pole leaning against the fence where I never left it. The water was cloudy, the chlorine was low, and there was a popsicle wrapper floating by the drain, which I stared at for a full minute because nothing makes a grown man feel more ridiculous than standing beside his own swimming pool holding somebody else's trash like it is evidence in a murder trial. I went to Vernon's door that evening and asked if anyone had been in my yard. He did not blink. He said, "Not that I know of." I said, "Vernon, someone used the pool while I was gone." He shrugged and said, "Kids cut through places sometimes. You know how summer is." I said my gate was locked. He said, "Well, maybe you forgot." That was the second warning sign. And it was not small, because a man who will tell you that you forgot your own locked gate while looking you in the eye is not trying to avoid conflict. He is trying to rewrite the floor under your feet. I left without raising my voice, but something in me had shifted. My father had been a county clerk, a quiet man with ink on his fingers and a low tolerance for sloppy stories, and he used to say, "Earl, memory is a gentleman until money or pride walks into the room, then memory starts changing hats." So I started keeping records. Now, in 1995, we did not have smart cameras sending little alerts to our pockets. We had heavy camcorders, motion lights, VCR timers, notebooks, Polaroids, and patience. And I had enough patience to make a saint look jittery. I mounted 2 floodlights on the back eaves, borrowed my son's old VHS camcorder, set it on a shelf in the laundry room window aimed at the gate, and put a second cheap black and white security camera from the hardware store under the soffit, running to a VCR in the hall closet that recorded in grainy 6-hour blocks. It was not elegant, but it worked. I also pulled my file box from the hall closet, the one Linda used to tease me about, and gathered everything: the original pool contract from 1983, the county permit, the inspection card, the property survey, insurance papers, pool service receipts, chemical receipts, repair invoices, even photographs from the summer we had the concrete poured with Linda standing there in cutoffs and sunglasses, smiling like we had built the Taj Mahal. I did not know exactly what I was preparing for, but I knew Vernon had crossed from borrowing into taking, and taking always gets bolder when nobody writes it down. The first tape caught him on August 11th at 7:18 in the evening. After I closed the store late, Vernon stepping through the side gate with a key I had never given him, followed by 2 kids and a woman I did not recognize. He looked around once, quick and guilty, then waved them in. I watched that footage at midnight in my living room, the VCR humming, the picture flickering, and felt a cold little laugh rise in my chest. Not because it was funny, but because there is relief in seeing proof of what your gut already knew. Over the next month, I caught 5 more entries, then 7, then 9, sometimes through the gate, sometimes through a loosened fence board behind the lilacs, sometimes after dark, which took the whole thing from neighborly abuse into something uglier. On one tape, Vernon carried in a little plastic caddy of pool toys and sunscreen like he was stocking a cabana. On another, he used my leaf net, then tossed it on the ground. On another, Marlene stood near my flower bed and said something I could not hear. But the way she pointed at my house made my stomach tighten. I started writing everything in a spiral notebook. Date, time, who entered, what they touched, whether the gate was damaged, what the pool looked like afterward. I had the gate rekeyed by Frank Talley from Talley Locksmith and got a receipt. I hired a fenceman to replace the loose boards with fresh oak planks and long screws. Receipt. I bought a chain and a no trespassing sign. Receipt. I sent Vernon the certified letter, typed on my old Smith Corona because I did not own a computer then, stating clearly that he no longer had permission to enter my yard or use my pool, that all prior permission was revoked, and that any future entry would be trespassing. The post office stamped it, Vernon signed for it, and I put the green card in the folder like it was a winning lottery ticket. For 12 blessed days, nothing happened. The pool sat clean and blue, the gate stayed shut, and I began to think maybe shame had finally done what manners could not. Then came Labor Day weekend. I was at the store doing inventory, because small business owners know holidays mostly as days when everybody else relaxes while you count wiper blades, and when I pulled into my driveway around 4, I heard splashing before I even turned off the engine. Not laughter from next door. Not some distant child, but splashing from my backyard. I walked around the side of the house, and there he was, Vernon Pike, standing waist-deep in my pool like a man baptized in entitlement, with 4 children, Marlene, and another couple on my deck. He saw me and had the nerve to smile. "Earl," he said, "you are home early. I said everybody out." The other couple froze. The children went quiet. Marlene stared at her towel, and Vernon put both hands up like I was the unreasonable one bringing thunder to a picnic. "Now, Earl, let us not embarrass ourselves." I said, "You are standing in my pool after I sent you a certified letter telling you not to enter my property." He climbed out slowly, water running off him, belly pale, face red, pride trying to find a place to stand. He said, "I have put time into this place too, you know." I looked at him and said, "You have put trespassing into this place." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell chlorine and cheap beer on his breath, and said, "You are going to be a lonely old man if you keep treating neighbors like enemies." That one landed harder than I wanted it to, because loneliness was not an idea to me. It was a chair across the breakfast table that had been empty for 4 years. For half a second I almost answered like a hurt man instead of a careful one, but then I looked at the laundry room window where that little red recording light was on, steady as a heartbeat. I said, "Vernon, get your people and leave." He did. Through the gate this time, not the fence, because cowards remember appearances when witnesses might be watching. I called the sheriff's office and Deputy Carl Henson came out, a big square man with tired eyes and a notebook that looked older than both of us. I showed him the letter, the receipts, the tape from that afternoon, and a few of the earlier tapes. He watched quietly, asked practical questions, then went next door. I could not hear every word, but I heard Vernon's voice rise once, carrying across the fence, saying, "We had an understanding." Deputy Henson came back 20 minutes later and told me Vernon had been advised that any further entry would likely result in a trespass charge. "Likely?" I asked. Henson sighed and said, "Earl, I am telling you man to man, your paper trail is strong. Keep it that way." That was good advice, and I took it. By then the season was ending anyway, and the pool had been abused all summer. Cloudy water, scratched steps, one cracked return cover, and enough uninvited feet in it to make me feel like the thing needed more than chlorine. It needed an exorcism. So in late September, I had Redmond Pool Service drain it, scrub it, inspect the shell, repair the return cover, repaint a worn patch at the shallow end, and leave it empty for winterizing until the work cured. Every invoice went into the folder. Every photograph, too. The pool looked strange, empty, bigger somehow, like a room after the furniture is gone. And I remember standing at the edge that evening feeling both sad and relieved, because the water Linda had loved was gone for the season, but so was the illusion that Vernon could just keep taking because he smiled while doing it. 3 days later, he knocked on my front door with 2 deputies. Not Henson this time, 2 younger ones, Deputy Alvarez and Deputy Boone. Both polite, both cautious, both wearing that expression officers get when the caller has told one story and the house they are standing in seems to be telling another. Vernon stood between them in a windbreaker, hair combed wet, face solemn like a man arriving at a funeral. He said, "Earl drained our pool." I actually laughed once, just one short, ugly sound, and I wish I could say I was above it, but I was not. Deputy Alvarez asked if they could speak with me about a property damage complaint. I said, "Absolutely, come on in." Vernon looked surprised at that, like he had imagined me blustering on the porch, giving him the little scene he needed. Instead, I brought them into the kitchen, offering coffee because my mother raised me right even when idiots were present, and opened the folder on the table. I had labeled it Pool Trespass 1995, which sounds dramatic now, but at the time it was just accurate. I started with the property survey showing the pool entirely within my lot, then the 1983 contract with Whitaker paid in full across the top, then the county permit, then the insurance schedule, then 12 years of service records, then the certified letter Vernon signed, then the fence repair receipt, then the lock receipt, then the pool service invoice for draining and maintenance. Then I turned on the VCR. There is a particular silence that falls over a kitchen when a man watches himself doing the thing he swore he did not do. Vernon stood near the doorway with his mouth slightly open, while the tape showed him entering my yard on August 11th, then August 19th, then September 2nd, then Labor Day, clear as day, Vernon in my pool after the certified letter. Vernon telling me not to embarrass ourselves. Vernon walking out with wet footprints behind him. Deputy Boone looked from the television to Vernon and said, "Sir, is that you?" Vernon shifted his weight and said, "We had shared use." Deputy Alvarez said, "Shared ownership." Vernon said, "Well, not ownership exactly." Deputy Boone said, "Is the pool on your property?" Vernon said, "It is adjacent. I remember that word because he said it like a lawyer had mailed it to him. Adjacent." Deputy Alvarez said, "Adjacent is not ownership." Vernon's face tightened. He said, "I maintained access for the children. I brought supplies. I helped keep an eye on the place. Earl benefited from the arrangement too." I said, "Deputy, he brought a plastic dolphin float and left popsicle wrappers in my skimmer basket." "That is not maintenance." Boone coughed into his hand, and I knew he was trying not to smile. Vernon heard it too, and that made him reckless. He pointed at me and said, "He is doing this because he does not like families around, because he sits back there alone and resents anybody else having a life." There it was, the cruel little truth he had been carrying around, polished up for use. The room went still. I felt my ears get hot, not with anger first, but with grief, because some insults know exactly where the door is. I looked at Vernon for a long second and said, "My wife loved that pool. My boys grew up in that pool, and I let your grandkids use it because I remembered what joy sounded like back there. You mistook kindness for weakness, Vernon, and then you brought deputies to my door to help you steal the rest." Nobody spoke for a moment after that. Deputy Alvarez closed the folder gently, like it had become something heavier than paper. He told Vernon there was no evidence of any ownership interest, no right to demand restoration, and no basis for a property damage complaint. He also told him that based on the certified letter and the recorded entries, another complaint from me could go a very different way for him. Vernon started to argue, then stopped because even he could feel the road ending under his feet. The deputies thanked me for my time. Deputy Boone paused at the door and said, "Mr. Whitaker, I wish every property call came with this much paperwork." I said, "My father was a county clerk." He nodded like that explained a whole family tree. EAEN. After they left, I stood in the kitchen and watched Vernon walk back across his lawn without his salesman bounce, without the big laugh, without the audience he thought he had brought for my humiliation. The afternoon light hit the empty pool just right, and for a minute it looked less like something ruined and more like something waiting. I hired an attorney the next week, Gloria Denton, sharp as a tack and twice as pleasant as you expected, and she sent Vernon a letter that used words like trespass, liability, civil action, and future contact, which are not musical words, but under the right circumstances they do sound a little like justice. Vernon did not answer it. Winter came. The leaves fell into the empty pool cover instead of the water, and by spring of 1996, Redmond Pool Service refilled it, balanced it, checked the pump, and told me it was in better shape than it had been in years. That first warm evening, I sat by the water with a ball game on the radio and a glass of tea sweating on the table, and I thought about Linda, about how she would have listened to the whole mess and said, "Earl, you do know how to attract odd people," and I laughed so hard I almost spilled my drink. Vernon and Marlene stayed next door another year and a half. They did not wave much after that, which was fine by me. His grandkids still visited, and sometimes I would hear them playing in his yard, and I never blamed them playing in his yard, and I never blamed them. Adults build the fences children have to live around. One afternoon in July, the older boy, maybe 10 by then, stood near the property line and said, "Mr. Whitaker, I am sorry Grandpa got mad about your pool." I told him, "Son, grown folks get confused sometimes when they want something too much." He nodded like that made sense, then ran off to chase a baseball. I think about that more than I think about Vernon, because the boy understood in one sentence what his grandfather tried to bury under a summer full of excuses. Now, some people later told me I should have pressed charges right away, and maybe they are right. Some said I should never have let him use it even once, and maybe they are right too. But I'm not sure life works clean like that. Sometimes kindness opens a door, and sometimes a person with muddy shoes walks through it, and the lesson is not to become cruel. The lesson is to learn where the lock goes. By the end, I did not feel triumphant exactly, not like in the movies where the bad guy gets dragged off and everyone claps. I felt older, a little wiser, and strangely peaceful because I had defended something that mattered to me without becoming the loudest man in the room. Vernon had brought deputies to prove a lie, and I had opened a folder that told the truth, one receipt at a time. The pool is still there in my mind, blue under a Kentucky evening, the radio low, the fence repaired, the gate locked, the water finally just water again. And here is what I want to ask you, because I have heard every opinion under the sun about this story. Was I too patient with Vernon? Should I have called the law the first time I saw wet footprints? Or is there still something decent about giving a neighbor a chance before you bring the hammer down? Tell me what you would have done if a neighbor turned your kindness into a claim of ownership. And tell me honestly, where does being neighborly end and being a fool begin?